Like, bro, you just walk in and then boom, that's on your foot. You see how quick it did it? Come on here. We got the insect tier list from TierZoo. Now, off the dome of my head, ants should be S to A tier. I'll look-y give them A. And manatees. What the? I mean to say mantis, praying mantis. What am I saying manatees for? But praying mantis should be, it gotta be S tier. I remember I seen on TikTok a praying mantis just ripping apart this damn hornet or something. Like it took the stinger out, took the leg off, and just started eating it. I was like, yo. Beyond that, I don't know what the tier list is gonna look like. So we're finna find out. So if you're new, like, comment, subscribe. If you're not new, just keep coming back. Subscriber, what are you doing?
Play of the game.
Jack Jumper Ant. She just jumped into death. That's me and Elden Ring just rolling into death. I need healing.
Insects are one of the most broken factions the game has ever seen. Nowhere else in nature will you find such an incredible concentration of abilities that are not only overpowered, but also extremely unique. It's tough to even know where to start when talking about what makes insects such a successful group, because in a lot of cases, it's not just that their individual
beetles terrify me. I don't like it.
But some of them feel like they should be mutually exclusive.
My dumb ass used to get beetles and roaches mixed up.
In combination with one another. You'll see what I mean.
Not that I thought they looked alike. I just thought beetles were called roaches and roaches were called beetles.
Attributes and history. Insects were added to the game during the early Carboniferous expansion. The devs bumped up the atmospheric oxygen level, which allowed members of the arthropod faction to adopt larger sizes and more costly abilities. And while most of the arthropod player base was trying to dominate the land by leveling up their size, a small offshoot of the crustacean player base opted to forego the gigantism trait, and instead used this oxygen bonus to unlock an ability never before seen in-game: flight. Because these new creatures were the very first to gain the ability to fly, the air became entirely their domain for the time being, and would remain that way until reptiles unlocked the ability several expansions later. Insects are extremely diverse in their abilities and stat spreads. In fact, they're so diverse that it's impossible to include them all in a single video. Stat spreads. Several expansions later. Insects are extremely diverse in their abilities and stat spreads. In fact, they're so diverse that it's impossible to include them all in a single video. I'll be keeping things fairly generalized, but truth be told, many of the groups I'll be discussing today have so many standout members that they could easily be an entire tier list in and of themselves. So it's a little tough to pin down their general attributes, but there are a few commonalities. Being members of the arthropod faction, all insects are granted the exoskeletal armor perk, which greatly raises their AC compared to soft-bodied builds of similar sizes, with the only downside being a massive reduction in those same defensive stats for a short time every time the player levels up. This makes insects quite tanky on average, allowing them to excel in combat.
Man, the insect beefing with a cat. How does this even happen?
Compound Eyes perk, which grants them vastly improved awareness compared to other arthropods like scorpions and centipedes. With 360-degree vision, their ability to avoid obstacles, dodge attacks, and pursue targets while flying is far superior to most other flyers. This enhanced perception perk is important because insects tend to have naturally high stealth, so in order to compete with other insect builds, acute vision is required. We've only just scratched the surface of the insane abilities insects have access to, though. For a more in-depth look, let's get into the tier list. At the bottom of the tier list, we have the silverfish. The silverfish is the most primitive insect build still in existence. It kind of blurs the line between what is and is not considered an insect, and not in a good way. Unlike other flightless insects, which decided to respec and drop the flight ability in favor of more refined strategies, the silverfish build actually never had access to it in the first place. Aside from having an exoskeleton, they don't really have any of the abilities that make insects powerful. They do not have wings and have essentially no combat abilities. That is crazy camouflage.
What the hell?
They do not
that is some crazy camouflage, bro.
They have fairly low defenses and get
bombed left and right
at pretty much everything, with their only useful stat being their decently high movement speed. Their special ability allows them to gain XP from eating cellulose and lignin, meaning they can farm XP from
Ligma?
wooden structures, which normally don't grant any experience. This ability would be fairly powerful in forest biomes, but because they're such weak combatants, they tend to actually stick to urban areas, feeding on things like paper and cloth, in the relative safety of houses, apartments, and offices.
This is just letting me know, bro. If I was an insect, I'd be fucking dead. Like I'm not seeing half of these, bro. I didn't even see this frog. I didn't see the other. I didn't see any of this.
Biomes, but
I'd be dead, bro. If I was an insect, I'd be dead. You know, some people believe we got spirit animals. I hope we don't have spirit insects. I hope I don't come back as an insect, because I would not make it, bro.
Combatants, they tend to actually stick to urban areas, feeding on things like paper and cloth, in the relative safety of houses, apartments, and office spaces. Even there, they aren't completely safe, though.
Man, spiders look weird, bro.
Truly safe in the insect meta, the silverfish's extreme lack of useful abilities places it firmly in F tier. That's honestly the only insect build I believe.
Bro, I wouldn't even want to step on a spider that big, bro. You just gotta.
And even the less viable ones tend to have at least a few
You gotta
useful
shoot
things
that
going
mug.
for them, even if those things aren't necessarily broken. First
Walking
in D
stick.
tier, we have the Phasmid build, which includes walking sticks and leaf mimics. These builds sport what are unquestionably some of the most impressive camouflage abilities in the entire game, second only to color-changing builds like the Octopus and Chameleon. As impressive as these are, though, the question I constantly end up asking is this really necessary? Because with the exception of insects which deliberately lower their stealth as part of the aposematic coloration strategy, insects as a whole already have an above-average stealth, and are usually able to maintain this while still speccing into other equally impressive abilities. Their camouflage can only take them so far. While they're near undetectable while remaining motionless, walking sticks still need to move to find food. And while they do mimic the movement of a swaying leaf or branch, this certainly isn't perfect. In fact, if they're ever caught in an environment where camouflage doesn't match as well, their instincts to sway and move can actually end up giving their position away even more, rather than aiding in their attempts to hide. Some Phasmids do possess chemical defenses, but as we'll see further up the tier list, this attack is quite mild compared to the heat some other insects are packing.
That damn thing was dancing.
Phasmids have a similar game plan to sloths, complete with all the major flaws this strategy is riddled with. Although at least Phasmids don't completely forego all common sense and make a dangerous trek to the forest floor once a week just to poop. Next in D tier, we have the Lepidopterans, the faction which includes moths, butterflies, and skippers. At first glance, these may seem like absolute bottom tier builds. They're among the most vulnerable builds in the game when it comes to combat, with extremely squishy defensive stats and utterly abysmal offensive abilities. Many of the larval forms of these builds are 100% defenseless and have a mobility stat in the single digits, literally the freest kills in the game. However, the Lepid player base is quite crafty and has come up with a few ways of at least sort of mitigating their many weaknesses. Caterpillars and adult lepids alike can adopt quite convincing disguises, some designed to help them blend in, and some designed to intimidate. Granted, these strategies often don't hold up against high intelligence builds, but it does help. Some caterpillars spec into quite potent defenses, like spines and toxins, which make them simply not worth the potential damage to take on. And credit where credit is due, even though they still are fairly defenseless, butterflies and moths do have
Look at that ant. Checked them. Like, told him check in, bro. Like, hey, bro, next time you come down here, check in, bro.
This enables them to avoid high conflict.
I'm gonna let you go this one time, but next time you're down here, bro, you better check in.
That might be too rare for most players to
Oh, it's gonna be a pally.
Their massive wings, in addition to being highly customizable for a variety of stealth or intimidation purposes, also just make them look much larger than insects of comparable body sizes, which helps dissuade attacks. But ultimately, lepids still take plenty of L's, and most high-tier insect builds have quite oppressive matchups against them, so they're definitely a below-average faction. That's actually it for D tier, and I know it might seem like we're moving up the tier list quickly, but again, insects are a massively successful faction, and are going to be concentrated in the higher tiers. At the bottom of C tier, we have the cockroach. The cockroach is the ultimate survivor,
they need to be S.
which
You can't kill
opted to
them.
spec into mobility, stealth, and a multitude of elemental resistances in lieu of any offensive abilities. While they don't pack much heat, their flat-shaped
I'm glad I never had to deal with them for real. I seen a couple of them in my day.
Extremely difficult for other players.
Nah, I always hear people always talk about I seen a couple of them in my day. Nothing, I never really had to deal with them for real, but the one, I ain't gonna lie. I remember my parents had like a rental house they were like renovating. And boy, them cockroaches were running around like, oh my God. It's like they wouldn't die, boy. Oh my God. Renovating that rental house was the worst.
Them in. They're rather clumsy flyers, but they do have an above average ground movement speed, enabling them to quickly scurry to cover if they have an above average ground movement speed, enabling them to quickly scurry to cover if they see a predator player approaching. However, when caught out in the open or backed into a corner, they're fairly helpless and easily one of the most vulnerable builds in the entire insect faction. They're also somewhat carried by human mains, making temperate and tundra servers viable for them, because really, as impressive as their toxin and radiation resistance abilities are, they're quite vulnerable to the cold, and would still be mostly confined to jungle servers if not for humans unlocking the fire control ability. The biggest variants may be able to tank 1 or 2 hits, but even then, with no way to fight back, they're still pretty scary if they fail to escape a fight. Next in C tier we have the Earwig, a fearsome-looking generalist build which appears to have a giant pair of mandibles on its rear end, called Circe. As fearsome as these Circe forceps are, if we actually check the Earwig's base stats, we quickly notice that, just like all of its other stats, its power stat is actually quite mediocre. As menacing as the Circe are, the actual high pain tolerance deal is fairly minimal, and can even be deflected by the most basic of armor. And even against builds without armor, the damage is so low that larger builds still don't really need to be wary of approaching an Earwig, and can attack without restraint. Still, just because they can doesn't mean they do, as the Earwig's intimidation factor alone is oftentimes enough to protect it from conflict. And credit where credit is due, the forceps are actually fairly decent in matchups against soft-bodied insects, and allow the Earwig to carry their targets much better than they could with their jaws. And while it may seem silly to have opted for rear-facing weapons instead of the more typical forward-facing ones like mandibles and rostrums, the position does actually serve a purpose.
Insects are so
far greater access to burrows and tight spaces, where they can hide out and avoid conflict altogether. Of all of the weapons insects have access to, Circe might be some of the most unorthodox, which probably contributes to its ability to intimidate other players. However, I think to get out of mid-tier, Earwigs need to actually have the ability to back up their threat display. They would do well to spec into some sort of venom. Venom-infused stings are a fairly common attribute for insects, so this feels like a bit of a missed opportunity. So,
they need to update. They need a buff.
Mid-tier, don't overestimate this build's abilities.
Crickets
At
and
the top of C tier,
grasshoppers.
we've got the Orthopterans, including grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids. These are the first mobility-centric builds on our list.
Yeah, I
While they're
forgot,
quite
bro.
capable
Grasshoppers
flyers,
be making,
their
they
true
be
power comes from their
fading with
legs rather than
fucking
their
matches,
wings.
bro.
Flight is an excellent defensive ability, as it allows the user to get out of reach of an attack's range. But this utility is lessened if their ability to get airborne has too much startup.
Bro!
And so instead of using their wings to get themselves up into the air, a powerful jump enables the Orthopteran mains to escape vertically at instant speed.
Like he got something.
Makes it
He
extremely
left with
difficult
something.
to get within striking range without alerting them. And because their jump has such excellent frame data, landing an ambush strike on an Orthopteran can feel near impossible at times. And even if a player does
That is
manage to
insane.
secure a grab, their powerful hind legs can function as quite an effective combo break. The spines on their legs augments the damage their kicks can deal, meaning that if a grasshopper can tank the first few hits of an ambush attack, they may be able to turn the tide of a confrontation and escape after dealing serious damage to the attacker. With that said, I think there are a few flaws in their strategy which I think keeps them out of the upper tiers. Grasshoppers can jump so far that there's really no way of knowing what sort of situation they're about to put themselves in. In a similar manner to the flying fish, using such a drastic escape option can sometimes end up putting you in a worse position than you were before, especially if your local meta has a lot of spider players, and although they do present a challenge, most predator players aren't disrupted by the grasshopper's kicks, and can either tank the damage outright or one-hit.
That is true. I was thinking about it. I'm like, man, that is right. Like, that is a useful skill to get away. Bro, you don't know how many grasshoppers or crickets I seen on a mousetrap, bro. Like, if you just place a mousetrap, because we got mousetraps in our basement because we have mice and whatever. And, bro, it was more fucking crickets and shit on there than the mouse. I was like, yo. You know, there's more crickets and grasshoppers than mice.
hit the grasshopper before it even has a chance to retaliate.
True bug.
At the bottom of B tier, we have the hemipterans, a diverse order of insects with a few things in common, including generally having high defense and being somewhat shield-shaped. However, the most notable thing is that rather than slicing or pinching mouth parts, the Hemiptera build opts for a piercing rostrum, perfect for puncturing through tough surfaces.
I'm looking at.
For the majority of Hemipteran builds, this allows them to farm XP from sources that are normally hard to access, like the energy-dense sap inside trees and stems, or the starch inside of seeds. However, there are some Hemipterans which use their sharp rostrum to deliver a venomous bite that is able to pierce through armored targets. Their venom is powerful enough to one-shot just about any other insect, and can even deal severe damage to larger builds. The only major shortcoming here is that these so-called assassin bugs tend to actually have fairly low stealth, opting for the aposematic intimidation defense I mentioned earlier. And on top of all that, they have fairly low mobility, making actually ambushing another player kind of difficult if they're actually paying enough attention to simply dodge the attacks and flee. Some do break this trend though.
Spiders move too damn quick, boy.
And
you didn't even
aquatic
see
mobility,
it go under the...
making them some of the most fearsome aquatic builds in the game. On the herbivore side of things, Hemipterans tend to fare a bit worse. They usually still have fairly low mobility and low stealth, and their defenses may be higher than the average, but are nowhere near as impenetrable as some of the builds higher on this list. They tend to rely on a chemical defense similar to some phasmids, which is where they get the name stink bugs from. However, similar to phasmids, these defenses also tend to be a bit lacking, and often... However, similar to...
Bro, imagine walking past this?
phasmids,
And out of nowhere?
these defenses also tend
This is on your foot? Where is this at?
stink bugs from. However,
You
similar
just
to
walking,
phasmids,
walking? Hold on.
these defenses
Like, bro, you just walking, and then boom, that's on your foot? You see how quick it did it? Bro, I don't fuck with spiders, bro.
also tend to be a bit lacking, and often fail to deter attackers. So certainly a group with some standout members, and fine for
Alright.
XP farming, but still nothing too broken.
Okay.
Hemiptera, a rather clumsy build with some pretty pathetic looking base stats. Genuinely one of
Yeah.
the least agile flyers in the entire game. However, looking at the final form of this build paints a highly misleading picture of its capabilities. The larval form, which is the form they spend the vast majority of their time as, is a brutally effective predator build for any player who prefers the camping playstyle. Taking a look at
That's
the larval
boring.
stats, we see that they have incredibly high power and stealth for their size. Antlions have a devastating, venomous bite, which they use to one-shot unsuspecting players before draining all their
I
life
hate people
points
that
with their
camp in the
hollow
back of
jaws.
Newtown, bro.
Because
I
their
don't know
ability to
about this
construct
build,
pitfall
bro.
traps, their passive stealth rating is extremely high, making their ambush playstyle unbelievably effective.
It's giving me
As if
camp
escape
in
wasn't
the...
hard enough,
in the
once
back
the
of
prey gets
Newtown
caught in
vibes,
their
bro.
trap,
I don't
the
like it.
antlion even has the ability to launch projectiles to stun its target, making escape a near impossibility. I have an entire video dedicated to the overpowered abilities of Neuropteran larvae, but in short, they are what the earwig pretends to be. If you took
Damn.
the earwig Circe, put them in front and made them sharper and gave them deadly venom to boot, you'd have an antlion. So why the weak adult form? Having spent all their evolution points optimizing their larval form, they spend hardly any time at all as adults. They don't even have the ability to eat in this form, and really only exist to be a vessel that allows players to find each other and complete the mating questline, something they lack the ability to do in their much less mobile larval form. So while I do think it'd be more impressive if they didn't take such a massive cut to their power level during their final level up, there's no denying that for the vast
Man,
majority
what
of their
kind of
playtime, nerf? These builds are an
That's the
absolute
nerf of
menace to the
hell,
counter.
bro.
At the bottom of A tier, we have a
Damn. Okay. Who S tier then? It gotta be ants, right? I ain't gonna lie. The praying mantis was like S tier to me. The way they be moving, boy. But okay, they bottom A tier. Okay. Interesting.
personal favorite of mine, the mantis. Mantises have a fairly straightforward playstyle consisting of slashing and grabbing their targets using powerful spiked raptorial forelimbs. If we take a look
Hey,
at the
Mantis.
mantis' stats, we see that the mantis has one of the highest base power stats of any non-venomous insect, It also has a stealth stat similar to that of a walking stick, which it desperately needs in order to be able to get within striking range of its targets. Its clumsy flight and slow ground movement speed makes chasing prey basically impossible. However, what they lack in movement speed, they easily make up for with strike speed. The mantis's strike is lightning quick, to the point that it's easily able to hit targets that are normally considered hopelessly evasive. As powerful as these strikes are, one weakness of the strategy is that the grappling attack doesn't immobilize the target, and actually brings them within range of a counterattack. And while the mantis's large size enables it to tank most counterattacks, attacking a venomous target can end up being a serious blunder for a
Well, I didn't see this, but I seen like
so definitely a powerful
it was a
high
fight
tier
like this,
predator,
bro. I seen, but
not one that's
the
so
Mantis
invincible that
kind of
Mantis
won.
mains can get careless. Next in A tier we have the flies. This does get a bit confusing due to the amount.
Okay, I'm thinking of house flies. Ain't the horse fly, the big fly? Bro, I remember they was called fruit flies, bro. Like, when I see like a big ass fly, they be like, oh, that's a fruit fly. So obviously that's wrong, because it's nowhere on this list. So I'm guessing they mean a horse fly. A bot fly? What the? Huh. Okay, now what makes this better than a mantis besides moving quick as hell?
Amount of other builds that use the word fly in their name. But this
I could hit a
true
fly.
Flies are defined by a very specific feature. True flies only have 2 wings. This might seem like a major trade-off, but while
I
it does
defeated a lot of flies in my
their
day.
flight ability disabled from taking damage, the perk they unlock in return is more than
You know
worth
what?
the risk. Instead of a second pair of wings, flies swap them out for halteres, a sensory structure that grants flies an insanely powerful buff to their aerial maneuverability and their evasion. Their superior aerobatics make them
They
all
finna
but
come back, bro.
impossible to land
Somewhere's
and get
around the
midair.
corner. Oh my
And
god,
also
they finna
enables
come back.
predator fly variants such as the robber fly
Finna
to
be
launch
swinging.
incredibly precise attacks
Swinging and
mid-flight
missing.
and take down targets that would normally be too powerful to confront head-on, but are unable to effectively counterattack during flight. However, most flies are either scavengers or parasites, using their quick mobility and superior reaction speed to weave past the defenses
blink,
and
flamingo,
avoid the sweeping
blink. What are
counterattacks
you
of
doing?
larger players. While they do have an extremely short lifespan, there's no denying that they
Hey,
make
y'all,
the
you
most
good.
of the time they do have, and
Making
are one
sure.
of the most efficient and
Double
evasive
tap.
builds in the entire
Ugh.
game. But
Yeah.
while flies are excellent
Mouth
aerial
full of
combatants,
mud.
they are no match for the ultimate aerial hunter build.
Dragonflies.
The Dragonfly is similar to the Crocodile in that it is one of the most well-optimized PvP builds that has ever existed in the game.
Interesting.
It's already such an efficient build that across several balance patches and game expansions, the Dragonfly has seen very few changes to its core strategy. They simply aren't necessary, as the Dragonfly is already equipped to deal with just about anything the devs throw at it.
Okay.
So what is it about the Dragonfly that has given it such a competitive edge? Dragonflies have the best
I always
aerial
thought
maneuverability
dragonflies
of
were
any
just kinda
build in the
harmless.
game, and the highest top flight speed of any insect. Unlike most insects, dragonflies have spec'd into the ability to move their wings independently of each other, which grants them the ability to move in any direction without needing to turn and face that direction, meaning they
Damn,
can
that is
strafe
kinda
mid-flight
OP.
and even fly backwards.
That's OP.
This ability makes their flight more energetically demanding than it is
That's
for
kind of
other
fire.
insects.
That's fire.
So this is a high commitment, high reward playstyle. In order to ensure a proper payoff for their incredible agility, dragonflies have also spec'd into what is arguably the best vision of any arthropod. Extremely large, high-resolution eyes that take up basically their entire head, granting them full 360-degree vision. This allows them to track
Okay, imagine a human. Like, imagine you could see all around you, bro. I wouldn't even want that. Like, I wouldn't even want
all
that.
potential
That
targets
is-
around them with ease, and allows them to see
It would be
attacks
kinda fire,
coming
though.
long before they're actually
But I
at
just
risk
feel like
of
I
getting
look
hit.
weird.
Unlike many of the other builds on this list, which either have a powerful larval form but a weak adult form, or a powerful adult form that can only achieve this after enduring an extremely vulnerable early game, the dragonfly is a high-tier predator in both forms. While everyone knows they dominate the skies when they reach their max level, what you might not know is that as nymphs, dragonflies are one of the most vicious aquatic builds in the game, able to
Did not know that.
one-shot similarly sized fish and amphibian players.
That's kind of crazy.
Now, while it was tempting to put dragonflies in S tier, they do have a few shortcomings. While they are generally able to see approaching predators before it's too late, they aren't particularly good at avoiding accidentally flying into dangerous situations. They're easily trapped by spiderwebs and are often snatched out of the air when flying too close to another player. In addition, dragonflies cannot walk, meaning that their energy-expensive flight ability is their only option if they need to reposition themselves.
Bro,
Not that devastating of a weakness, but it's enough that this ancient build can't quite break into S tier.
why didn't I think of beetle as
First in
being
S tier, we
S
have
tier,
the
bro?
beetle.
Oh my god, I'm
The beetle
stupid.
is the epitome of the insect build.
Bro,
a
what?
bunch of
I did not think
extraordinarily
of that
powerful
at all.
abilities that seem like they shouldn't really function properly when used in conjunction with each other, yet somehow actually end up synergizing unbelievably well. Beetles are the premier tanks of the insect faction, with an outer cuticle sturdy enough to deflect just about any attack with ease. It has such a high AC that it can confidently plow through a swarm of aggressive ants without taking any damage, something that even many
I
reptiles
don't
and
know. It's taking a
amphibians
little
can't
damage.
get away with.
Maybe the armor.
Now, typically when a build is heavily invested into defenses like this, it has to make a
about
lot
the
of
offense.
sacrifices in its other stats.
Yeah.
This is the opposite of what we see in the beetle build, as in addition to being the most heavily armored insect in the game, it also excels in several other metrics. The most obvious of which is its power stat. Beetles can obliterate their enemies in combat using powerful jaws and explosive chemical weapons. Their ability to bulldoze opponents with their forward-facing weaponry is hard to overstate. But in my opinion, their real damage potential comes from beetles which possess the ability to blast their attackers with a toxic or acidic chemical burst.
So they got the ability to
But that's
squirt,
not where the
so they
craziness
just...
stops, because although you'd probably expect a high-power tank to be a slow, lumbering build, beetles also possess the top terrestrial movement speed of any insect. And if that weren't enough, despite often having heavy horns or giant mandibles, packing a tank full of noxious chemicals, being clad in heavy armor, and strapped with enough muscle to move objects far, far above
That
their weight
is
class,
crazy.
the beetle is still able to fly without much issue. Now, they did sacrifice one of their sets of wings for additional armor, so they can't perform the advanced aerobatics that dragonflies and houseflies can. But the ability to get from point A to point B via flight is still extremely valuable, both for escaping danger and for reaching valuable points of interest. In short, beetles have essentially every ability they could ask for. They are an amalgamation of everything that makes the insect faction so powerful, and so it's no surprise that beetle species comprise a whopping 25% of all species in the game. They're so versatile and adaptable that a beetle player can find a niche in essentially any server. They truly are the ultimate insect and deserve a tier list of their own. As incredible as this combination of powerful abilities is, ultimately the beetle is still lacking the most powerful insect ability of them all, eusociality. Now, I have an entire video dedicated to explaining just how broken this ability is, and there's no question that the insects that incorporate it into their game plan
So
simply
ants and bees
dominate
are
all
S
in
tier?
their path.
Termites. Okay.
Now,
I'm gonna
technically,
shut up.
termites are a variant of the cockroach build, but they have
Ants
such
gotta
a
be number
unique
one
and
in.
powerful
There's no way.
playstyle that lumping them in
Termites?
with mid-tier cockroaches seems disingenuous. The termite queen is the longest-lived insect in the game, with a lifespan near
That's
that of a
nasty.
human or elephant, and it spends these many decades building one of the most powerful armies the game has ever seen. These termite armies are able to construct some of the most well-fortified bases in the game, giving even beaver dams and human skyscrapers a run for their money. Not only
There's
do they build
no way
incredible
that's a
bases,
termite
but termites
base.
literally transform the map in order to better optimize their colony's ability to gather resources.
Yeah, I ain't
They
gonna
will
lie, they
pave
different.
paths and
They
build
different.
ramps and bridges to important
Yeah, they
resource
different.
deposits. This efficiency
I didn't
allows
know
them to
this.
support a huge army and command vast territories.
What?
Termites, despite being most closely related to cockroaches, have a combat style that is actually most similar to the spitting cobra, which, if you've seen my snake tier list, you'd know is also a top tier build. Termites can accurately fire acid from a needle-like horn
So
on
they
their
can
face,
squirt too,
dealing
alright.
heavy damage to anything caught in its blast. Some termites opt for giant slicing jaws instead of acid sprayers on their head, and are crucial
Making them
for
sound
defending
better
their
to
base from an
dance.
onslaught of invaders. Termites are a somewhat imbalanced build, with crazy powerful forward-facing weaponry, but extremely vulnerable abdomens with no armor at all. This means that oftentimes, despite a larger size, they are quickly overwhelmed if they get outnumbered and flanked. Not usually an issue, as termites are proficient at defending in a phalanx formation which covers the weak points of individual members. So certainly not a bad enough weakness to negate the top tier status of eusociality. But this weakness does mean that I gotta give the top spot to the other eusocial insect faction.
Ants. Yep. Ants,
Hymenoptera
bees,
is a
and
group of
wasps.
insects that includes
Okay.
ants, bees, and wasps. Unlike
Okay.
termites, these insects are a bit more well-rounded, having
Makes
decent
sense.
armor all over, and tend to have both forward and rear-facing weaponry, with most hymenopterans packing strong jaws and a venomous stinger. The wasp's signature buzz and yellow
I just think
band are
about
so infamous that
Coyote
almost every
going through all
other
the
insect
wasp
faction
things,
in the
bro.
game
All
has
the
at least a few
deadliest
members trying
wasp
to
things.
replicate it to gain advantage on their own intimidation checks. Eusocial hymenopterans can build extremely complicated structures without the use of tools. They can launch organized attacks containing thousands of combatants. They can capture prisoners,
I
cross
just broke
major
his neck.
barriers, and control territory to an absolutely incredible degree. Thousands of players will lay down their lives in defense of a colony if need be. Ants in particular are masters of both empire building and military tactics, often having to wage war on multiple fronts while undertaking large construction and agricultural projects in their own territory. So, while beetles may take up a larger percentage of total insect variants, termites and ants both vastly outnumber any other insect build. And while I don't base my tier lists purely off of population, there's no denying that the abundance of these insects is due to their incredibly
I've seen some
powerful
ants do some
strategies
crazy things,
and their
bro. So
ability to bend
I
their
agree with
environment
it.
to their advantage. In fact, the only genuine threats to you social players tend to be invaders disguising themselves as members of their own colony, but are really there to disrupt, steal, and attack. Many spider, hemiptera, and mantis mains adopt the strategy, and are incredibly successful in doing so. As the ant troops forage and browse unknown territory, the parasites weave their way into their ranks. Something similar happens when you browse the internet without using NordVPN, the sponsor of today's video.
Maybe.
As you browse, trackers latch onto your
Well, that's it. I ain't gonna lie, I'm not mad at it. You know, ants being the number one, ants, wasps, and bees being the number one. I've seen some ants take down some crazy things, bro. I did think mantis. I did think a mantis would be S tier, but you know what? Low A tier was kind of crazy too. I thought they would be at least top of the top dog A tier. Nope, they bottom dog A tier. But all right, good video. Puts a lot of work into it. You can tell. But that being said, see you on the next one. Peace.